Welcome to the Empowered Podcast, episode number 79. I'm your host, Ellery Wells, and today I wanted to talk about books that have shaped my past and really helped me create my future. And I'm working here in my home office here in the Austin area of Texas, and I'm looking at the books that are on my bookshelf, the ones that I have on my desk, the ones that I have boxed up and put in the closet to save some space. But I'm a big fan of reading. I'm a big fan of personal development. Although I don't read as much as I used to, oddly enough, I read more books when I did have a corporate job than I do now, because I don't always need those distractions of and looking for better ways to do things, or things that try to that I would need to pull away from the corporate job. But that's no excuse. I need to get back into reading, and specifically, I've been reading. Actually, I haven't been reading. I've been going through Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill the last couple days. I'm putting together a blog post of just these epic lessons that Napoleon put into this book 80 years ago. I think the official published date, I thought it was in the early 1930s, but it's actually late 1930s. I think it's 1937. If I'm wrong, just let me know, and this episode will just go down in the history books with me quoting the wrong date. But I'm going through this book, and it says things like, quitters never win and winners never quit. And it's a quote you might have seen on your Facebook wall, on your Twitter feed, and it may be attributed to some celebrity or someone who's on TV now. But Napoleon Hill wrote that 80 years ago. And it just goes to show the timelessness of really wise advice and wise counsel. Napoleon Hill's also credited with the origination of the whole mastermind idea. And if you've been listening to the podcast, or if you happen to read my blog, you know that I'm a huge, huge advocate of everyone who wants to be successful or get to the next level. I'm a huge advocate of everyone having a mastermind. And he developed that concept over 80 years ago, and it's absolutely incredible. And because of how awesome that book is, I want to give away 3 copies. So this is a giveaway between the blog and the podcast. So if you go to empoweredpodcast.com/79, one of the very first links that you will see on that page is a link that will take you to a page where you can enter to win one of the copies that I'm giving away. They'll be brand new. I'm going to the bookstore as soon as this episode gets produced to grab the copies. I'm going to give you a copy of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Plus, I'm going to give you 3 months free, completely free access to my membership site, which all in all, we're talking about almost $100 value here, and I want to give away that to you for free, so good luck. And then you've got my friend Jeff Brown, who does the Read to Lead podcast, and he says, which I agree with, he says readers are leaders, and he believes, and I agree, that you can't be an effective leader if you're not reading. So today I wanted to talk about some of the books that have really had a significant impact on my life, not only when I was in corporate America, but these books have shaped how I see the world, have directed and shaped how I do business today. And hopefully you can add a few of these to your personal library and get started. So let's go right in and take a look at what is on my bookshelf. All right, so we're not going to look at all the books that I have. Like I mentioned a couple years ago, I read 20 in a year, which maybe isn't all that much to brag about, but I have a lot of books. So I'm going to kick it off with a book called Flight of the Buffalo. Now, this book was written, I think, 20 or 30 years ago by a guy named James Belasco and Ralph Stayer. I'll put a link in the show notes. So if you go to him, if you're curious about these books and you want to check any of them out, I'm a big fan of Half Price Books. But if you don't live close to one of those, I'll put a link. It'll be an affiliate link, but it'll take you right to Amazon. You can have it delivered right to your door. You can get new books, of course. You can get used books from all over the place on Amazon. So I'll give you a link to that at empoweredpodcast.com/79. But one of the very first books that really stands out in my mind is this book called Flight of the Buffalo. And what I remember a couple years later, here we are after reading this, is that they made it abundantly clear that the ownership of the work needs to be on the person who actually does the work. It's not anybody's responsibility other than the person who is responsible for actually delivering the results. Here's what I mean. When I was in corporate America, and you might have a parallel situation, I was an account manager, which means I had anywhere from 30 sometimes up to 80 different accounts all over the West Coast. And I also had the ability to call on, like 20 to 30, sometimes 50 different resources within the company. And what frustrated me, and my frustration really came out of reading this book, what really frustrated me was I was responsible for managing these accounts, but I had no control over getting anyone on the team to perform. And no one in my organizational chart, if you will, had that control either. So we were made responsible for achieving these results, hitting these sales goals, making phone calls and doing all of these things, but we had no ability to keep anyone accountable for all the other things that were required to make it happen. And in the book, James and Ralph, the authors, give the example of a gardener, and there's a CEO of the company that owns the gardening company, and he's doing a site walk, or he's doing a tour of the grounds of one of his company's clients who, the people who are doing the work, the gardeners are working for this client. And again, this client is showing the CEO around. And there's a broken tool. There's a broken rake, I think it was, laying on the ground. And the customer, or the owner, the CEO, gets really frustrated, and he starts just trying to figure out what's going on and how he can get a replacement rake. And they go in and they dig a little bit deeper into this story, and they say that it's not the CEO's job to get a new rake. And that goes back to this ownership of whoever is responsible needs to actually be responsible. And if you are a leader in your company or in your business, you need to trust that you have hired the right person and you have the right people on the bus, which is a reference to Good to Great, which we'll get to here in just a second. But you have to trust that you have the right people in place and put the ownership of delivering the results on the people who are actually responsible for them. So again, that was Flight of the Buffalo by James A. Belasco, and Ralph C. Stayer. And before we go too much further, I want to give kind of this general disclaimer, this FYI, this watch out about books and personal development, because once I started this path of personal development, this rigorous amount of reading and studying how to make myself better, how to run a business better, more efficiently, more effectively, I started seeing how these authors were doing studies in these real world examples of how things were working, and it was not what I was seeing in my work environment. And the more I read, the more I saw. And the more I saw, the more frustrated I became. And the more frustrated I became, the wider this divide, this split between me being a happy yes man employee and what I wanted to do and accomplish in the world. I wanted to make changes, and I met resistance at every single turn, and I was powerless to do anything about it. So my disclaimer is read at your own risk, because the more educated you become, the more the way you see things in life will change. And if it's not working for you, it's not happening the way you're reading about when you walk into the office every day, it might make you a little bit frustrated and lead you down a path you aren't quite expecting to go. Anyway, the next book, and this directly ties into this disclaimer that I was just mentioning. This next book is EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey. EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey. And if you don't know who Dave Ramsey is, he talks about being smart with your money, getting out of debt, the debt snowball, and those kinds of things. But Dave Ramsey looked out at his organization as his company, and I think they had about, 200 employees or so at the time. And he was trying to figure out what kind of employees that he wanted. And he realized that he wanted employees that had the entrepreneur spirit, that they would see a problem and take the initiative to go after a solution. But he didn't want entrepreneurs in his organization, because he would train them and then they would all leave to go start their own businesses, which is understandable because that's what entrepreneurs do. We see a problem and then we find a way or figure out a way to solve it. So he didn't want all entrepreneurs or all entrepreneur-focused people. And then he looked at leaders. So he wanted people who had leadership qualities in his organization, but he wanted to take this initiative of solving problems and merge it with leadership. So that's where the EntreLeadership title comes from. And of course, Dave has conferences and high dollar coaching to go along with that. So it's been a successful business from him, and it all came from this idea of entrepreneurs plus leadership. Anyway, one of the things that really drove this was another hammer on this spike that's creating the divide between what I wanted and what I saw that I just mentioned, was the story that Dave puts in his book about Costco. Now, if you don't know what Costco is, it's like Sam's, and Sam's, of course, is owned by Walmart, but Costco's like Sam's with extra polish and quality on top of it. Now, that may be a little bit weird to say, but Costco generally has higher quality produce. Their brands of clothing that they have is usually a little bit nicer, and their Kirkland brand is often better than the Great Value brand that you'll get at a Walmart, which, by the way, I drink Costco coffee. I told that to some coffee connoisseurs, if you will, who are big into the bulletproof coffee, which I've never had bulletproof coffee. So if you haven't either, you can join this revolution of people who don't think putting butter in coffee is all that cool. Anyway, Dave put in this story of Costco, and up until reading this chapter of the book, I had been thinking, okay, guys, this is great. All these books that I've been reading, I was thinking, okay, this is great. Maybe your philosophies and these practices that you are implementing with your teams and with your businesses, maybe they work for teams that are at businesses with 100 employees, 50 employees, maybe 200 employees. But I don't know, and I really believe this. I don't know if this philosophy, this way of doing business, this way of treating people better, putting accountability on the actual person doing the work, I don't know if that works in businesses that scale up to 80 to 100,000 employees, because that's the environments in which I worked. At IBM, at Dell, IBM had, I think, 400 or 300,000 employees. Dell had 80 to 100, depending on who got laid off that week. Side jab there. But I didn't know if these philosophies of leadership, of team development, of personal development, I didn't know if they scaled all the way up to tens of thousands of employees in a company. And then again, I read this story about Costco and EntreLeadership. And Costco, in case you don't know, is one of the top 10 largest retailers in the United States and in the world. that means they have hundreds of thousands of employees. And Costco, again, sells anything from produce to wine. I think the other day I saw maybe a lawnmower, a push lawnmower. I don't know. You can get almost anything there. So it's not like they're just a niche product where they're very successful at doing one thing. They're successful at doing all these other things. And Dave goes into an analysis of Costco and says that they pay their people more, up to 50% more than their competitor, which I assume is Sam's. And how the CEO of the company, also the founder of the company, makes a salary of $300,000 to $400,000. And he wears jeans and has inexpensive furniture in his office and has an open door policy and makes an attempt to visit every single Costco location in at least the United States, if not the world, every year. So he's focused on employee development. He's focusing on getting the right people in the door and keeping them, paying them more. And I know it's not all about the money, but we have bills to pay. And there's a better way to do business. So here I am historically thinking that these philosophies that I'm reading about don't scale or may not scale, because up until this point I hadn't read it yet. And then I hear this Costco story about how one of the largest companies in the world is treating their people differently. I lift my head, or I turn around in my chair and I look around, and all of a sudden that's not what I'm seeing in my own corporate environment. So this is another book, Entree Leadership by Dave Ramsey, is another book that has really helped shape my past and changed my future in the moment. And that's one of the particular specific stories that stands out from that book. And again, I'll put a link so that you can check it out. But that's another one of those books that really needs to come with a warning label that you should read it at your own risk. The next book that I want to mention, and I went through a John Maxwell phase, so I'm not going to list all the books that I read or recommend all of the books that he has written as ones that have shaped my future. But the next one that I think is really important that you should read is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And here's why this one needs to be on everyone's list. Whether you realize it or not, you're a leader in some aspect of your life. Maybe you're just leading yourself. Maybe you're leading a small family, just you and your spouse, or maybe you're leading your kids. But whether or not you're doing anything with your leadership position is not important. I mean, you could be squandering it, you could be doing nothing, or you can be creating negative effects. But whatever the case is, you're a leader of something, even if it's just yourself. But either way, if you want to be a business owner, if you want to have any sort of success, you have to realize that you are a leader. And even though this is a leadership book, it applies to business, it applies to personal development in all aspects of your life. And there's a law, one of these 21 laws that really stands out in my mind, and it's called the law of the lid. And here's what the law of the lid states. It says that you can't lead anyone or raise anyone up to a level that is higher than where you are now. You have to lead from the front, and you can't tell someone how to get somewhere if you've never been there yourself. And the lid part comes from, most of the time, the success we see, the amount of influence that we have, the raises we get in our job, or the number of clients that we get in our business, most of that is dictated by ourselves. And it's kind of this idea of a self-imposed glass ceiling. That's where the law of the lid comes from, this glass ceiling. And it says that we can't get any higher than we've been ourselves. And I look at some of the coaching clients that I have, and I look at some of the mastermind students that I have working with me. And I use this phrase often, but I tell them, I can only talk to you about this because I've been where you are. And I think that's really powerful because I work with people who I know I can have an impact on. I know I work with people who I can speak to them from a place of having been there and have this experience. And this law of the lid in John Maxwell's book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, just really stands out from that as if I want my team to get better, if I want my business to get better, if I want my clients to be better, I have to be better. And the most powerful thing that we can do for the people around us is make ourselves better. Don't think of it as a selfish thing. Don't think of personal development as ignoring your family and hiding in a book. Of course, you don't want to do that. But think about the increase in impact that you can have if you are better. If you want to see how this works, think about 10 years ago and how much effective you are now than you were 10 years ago. And what have you done? Hopefully you've gotten better. The next book that I want to mention is Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, by Jim Collins. Good to Great. And this has to do with getting the right people on the bus. There's two concepts actually that stand out from Good to Great that I want to talk about. And again, the first one is getting the right people on the bus. It doesn't matter where the bus is going if all you have is the wrong people on it. And think about the bus as your own trajectory, your own career, your own business, your own relationships. It doesn't matter where it's all going if you're surrounded by bad people. Yeah, there are bad people out there. And I'm not just talking about people who disagree with you, but if you don't have the right people on the bus, it doesn't matter what business plan you have. It doesn't matter what your goals are. If you're not surrounded with the right people that will help you, not A, along the way, and B, when you get there, it doesn't really matter. So Jim Collins is a big fan of getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and then figuring out where you're going. And I like that analogy that it's not only about getting the right people, but it's also getting the wrong people off and then and only then figuring out where you want to take this thing, because it puts the emphasis on people, which again are the ones who are actually going to be doing this work, which goes back to what we talked about in Flight of the Buffalo. The second concept that's absolutely incredible with Good to Great is the flywheel concept. And I think that's actually what he calls it. It's called the flywheel concept. And he says, imagine this flywheel. And it's like a gear. If you think about like what's in a watch, or I'm sure everybody knows what a gear is, but think about it laying flat like it would be on a table. But it's actually on this pole. And the flywheel will turn. You're pushing it. Like if you've ever seen, my wife and I watched Spartacus a few years ago, and these slaves would always be tied to this flywheel, and they would be pushing it to turn a rudder or grind grain or something like that. It should be a concept that everybody is fairly familiar with. But imagine that this flywheel is 1,000 pounds. And when you step up to turn this flywheel, you can't move it hardly at all. You push and you push and you sweat and your back hurts. You've got the blood, the sweat, and the tears going into pushing this flywheel and making it move. And it takes you an hour to get it to budge even the slightest amount. And then it takes another hour to get it going again. And then another hour to keep it moving. And then all of a sudden, it becomes easier over time. And as you keep doing that, as you keep pushing, and as you keep trying to get this flywheel to move, all of a sudden, it's moving under its own weight. And you keep pushing and you keep pushing, and all of a sudden, it becomes to the point where you're hardly needed at all. And then over time, it becomes something that has so much momentum, just as hard as it was to get started, it would take that same effort, if not more, to slow it down and stop it. But if we only look at those first few hours, which really translate into days, weeks, months, or even years in our own personal development or in our own business, if we only look at that first beginning part, we'll never realize that if we just keep pushing and keep trying, it could sustain itself and move on its own. And to me, that's such a powerful analogy. On the blog, I've talked about some things that keep me going. What are some of the things that keep me focused and moving forward in the face of doubt, of fear? And in the last podcast episode, empoweredpodcast.com/78, I talked about this, and it was just the idea that I will quit before I reach this unseen finish line, or I will quit before this flywheel really picks up and starts moving under its own weight. And hopefully that resonates with you, because obviously it is stuck with me, and it's been a powerful analogy. So check out Good to Great by Jim Collins. The next two I'll kind of lump together, and one is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and the other one is Quitter by John Acuff. So in his book Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell that's where he introduces, as far as I know, I think that's where he introduces this 10,000 hour rule, that if you want to master anything, you have to spend at least 10,000 hours working at it, practicing at it, working on improving and honing your craft. And he gives examples like Bill Gates, and we all think, oh, Bill Gates was just, he created Microsoft and he became this billionaire, and now he's a philanthropist and blah, 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 blah. You don't necessarily know all of the things that Malcolm goes into in Outliers. And he says Bill Gates started coding, which led to his expertise in helping create Microsoft and all these products when he was a young teenager. So Bill Gates, we see this success, but we don't realize that his 10,000 hours began, I think it might have been when he was like 8 or 9 years old. And he's going to different schools. He's going to these labs with these old computers, which maybe some of you are out there thinking, man, Ellery must be so young if he's thinking these computers the size of rooms are old. But so Bill Gates got started, and he started building his 10,000 hours. And he goes into this concept that at 6,000 or 7,000 hours, you're really good. You're maybe exceptional at what you do. But it's not until this 10,000 hours that you have really become a master and you are the best in your field at it. And he doesn't just arbitrarily come up with this 10,000 hour number, but he goes back and does research and finds that before you get there, you still have things to learn. And even after 10,000 hours, of course, you have things to learn and all that, but just keep practicing, keep improving. And when you look at the level of success that you have, and I'm talking to myself here as much as anybody else, I think, have I hit that 10,000 hours? Have I really put in the time? And here's why this is important. And I talk to people who give up all the time. And that's, again, why masterminds are so important. That's why coaching is so important, because we're not just in these groups and in these coaching experiences, we're not just your friends at happy hour that hear that you quit and they say, okay, cool, let's go have another drink, or let's go back to the field and play, or whatever. These groups keep people accountable and help encourage you so that you don't give up, because so many people give up after not even 1,000 hours, not even 10% of the amount that they need to have. They publish 5 or 6 blog posts. They publish 20 podcast episodes. They read 5 books. They do whatever it is. They apply for 5 jobs. They have lunch with 5 people that they want to get to know. They look at this, and all of a sudden they don't think that they're getting the results or the traction that they think they should be getting, and then they stop. And I see this all the time. How many podcasts out there that have 25 episodes or less? I look at the occasionally explicit podcast that I do with Ashley, and I think we're sitting in the low 20s, and it's been a couple weeks since we've done a show. And we love doing that. We love our audience, but why have we not picked it back up again? By the way, I don't have an answer to that. I think we just get busy and sometimes forget. But whatever you're working on right now, are you thinking about quitting? And if you are, have you put in 500 hours of this yet? If it takes 10,000 to master it, surely if we're serious about this, we can put in 500. Now, 24 hours in a day, 500, I don't want to do that math off the top of my head, but that's a significant investment of time. And if you haven't at least put in, what is that, 500 out of 10, what is that, like, my math skills are not that great right now. It's like 5%. Yeah, that's 5% of the time it would be required to become a master. You want to stop before 5% gets invested? I don't know. I don't feel like I'm a master. I think I've probably put in maybe 9,000 to 10,000 hours, if not significantly more over the last few years. But I see people who quit after 30 hours of investment, and they expect to be getting all these magical results, these incredible results. They think that they should be making money online, have an audience of thousands, but they've given up after really what just amounts to a handful of hours in a very small amount of time. And if you believe Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers that it takes 10,000 hours to really master something, you and I probably, if we were honest with ourselves, we probably have a long way to go. The next book that I had mentioned, again, was Quitter by Jon Acuff. And Jon Acuff also wrote Start, which came after Quitter. And both are really great books, but here's why I love Quitter. One of the titles of the chapter in his book is Falling in Like with a Job You Don't Love. And that stuck out to me when I read it, and it still stands out in my mind because that's exactly where I was while working for corporate America. I did not like my job. I absolutely didn't love it, but I definitely didn't really like it either. But it paid the bills. It allowed me to have the runway that I needed to get where I am now. You know, if you're a military sci-fi geek like I am, you know what the Harrier jet is. It's the VTOL, the vertical takeoff the vertical takeoff and landing. It's basically a plane that can turn its jets vertical instead of horizontal and take off directly. We think that our success should be like the VTOL. We should be able to just take off immediately and get going at 100 miles an hour with no runway, no on-ramp. And Carrie Oberbrunner and I talked about this in episode 48, how many of the people, including ourselves, that want to make this transition from day job to dream job, which is the title of Carrie's book, we want it to be like a light switch. We leave one and immediately pick up where we left off, success-wise, money-wise, client-wise, whatever, in our new gig. And it doesn't work that way. And whenever I'm sitting here at my corporate job reading Quitter by Jon Acuff, I'm thinking, I really don't want to be here, but we need to fall in like with this job that we don't love because of the opportunities that it gives us. It gives us, again, this opportunity to provide ourselves a runway and on-ramp to ramp up and to develop our skills and to get those blog posts out there and to get that first $10 product out there. And even though we don't like the job, it does serve a purpose. It is a means to an end, and we need to embrace that, at least in the short term, so that we can get where we want to go in the long term. So that's Quitter by Jon Acuff. Next one, The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. And I wrote a blog post about this a while back, but the idea of the slight edge is that what is difficult today becomes easier over time. And what's easy today becomes more difficult over time. And he uses the specific example of going to the gym versus eating cheeseburgers. Now, I'm going to start talking about food, and I'm going to be hungry. So hopefully, you and I both won't go and just grab a cheeseburger at Burger King or something like that. But he talks about exercising and getting up early and going to the gym. It's going to be hard. Your back is going to ache. Your muscles are going to be sore, and you're going to sweat, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But then you're going to get like my wife Ashley is, where going to the gym feels part of your routine, and lifting those weights and running. Ashley used to hate running. Now she's on the treadmill all the time. So she's the perfect example of how things that sucked in the beginning began to get easier, and then now it's just natural. It's just the flow of how things go. And the same thing applies to any personal development that you're doing. You know, getting up early to read. I used to get up 3 hours before I had to work to read books like I'm mentioning here and write blog posts. And I'm a night person. I love staying up late. I like sleeping in and working things on my own schedule. So what was uncomfortable in the beginning is now easier. It's part of the routine. And the opposite part of that is that eating that cheeseburger, instead of eating healthy and going and finding that salad or taking the time to grill that chicken in a healthy way, you just go and you get that Burger King, you get that fast food because it's easier, it's simpler, it's faster. Well, you start gaining weight, and all of a sudden you lose this motivation to go to the gym, and you lose this motivation to cook healthier because, you know, we get addicted to that fat and that salt and on all these other things, and we start to crave it. And then over time, we're 400 pounds. We don't wake up 400 pounds, which is overnight, and we don't lose 400 pounds overnight. Both things are a process, so why not start today? Processes and put processes. Hope my pop filter's working there. Put processes in place today that will lead to positive results a year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. One more analogy that really stands out, and I talked about this in the last episode, is just this idea of this lily pad that takes over the pond. On the first day, you've got one lily pad. The second, you've got two. The next, you have four. And over time, it's slow growth. And then all of a sudden, it's explosive growth. My friend Mike Sutton and I, who does Be-Build, he's got a great podcast, a fantastic blog. You should check him out. But he and I talked several months ago about this concept of being an overnight success. And I laughed and I said, you may say that, but you know, I wrote a lot of blog posts that not a whole lot of people read. I did a lot of podcasts that not a lot of people listened to. And the idea is that all of this work goes on behind the scenes, and most people don't realize how much work goes into becoming a success. All they see is the event or someone who has, quote, arrived at their destination of success. But as we know, if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, we know that success is not an event, it's a process. But most people don't notice until there is an event or what they deem as successful. And this lily pad, if you didn't know what was going on behind the scenes, what was going under the surface of the water, you would just think that, hey, one day these lily pads covered the entire pond, but they don't realize everything that went to get there, the doubling every day. So if it doubles every day after 30 days, this lily pad covers the entire pond. The day before, it was only half. The day before that, only a quarter. But day before that, what is that, an eighth? So 1/8 of the pond is covered by lily pads 4 days before it's completely covered. Nobody's going to notice an eighth. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to think that that's anything important. But that's all part of the process of learning, growing, and developing. So again, that's The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. The subtitle of that book, which I love, is Turning Simple Disciplines into Massive Success. And I just love that book. The next one on the list is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. And I read this book, I think also when I was on a vacation. If you're not taking books on vacation, by the way, you should absolutely do that. But I read The War of Art by Steven Pressfield a couple years ago, and Pressfield's main topic of focus is that there's a resistance that we all face, and we have a choice. Do we give in to the resistance? Do we give up? Do we listen to the naysayers and that voice in our head? And forget everybody else. I think our biggest naysayer is often right between our ears. And do we listen to that? Do we listen to that resistance and give into it, or do we fight it? Do we fully embrace the message that we have to share with the world, and do we share that with other people? It's a quick read. The War of Art is not a very long book. The chapters are short. It's a very easy book to read, but it'll be very powerful if you are the creative type. If you have a message to share, if you have a book that you want to write, or a podcast that you want to start, or a blog, or maybe even just a blog post that you are wondering whether or not you should publish those things. If you have a creative project in mind, you absolutely have to read The War of Art. The next book on the list that I want to talk about real quick is Jab, 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 Right Hook by Gary Vaynerchuk. Now, I haven't followed a whole lot of what Gary does. I haven't read most of his books. I've never seen him speak. I don't troll him on or watch everything he does on YouTube. But Jab, 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 Right Hook is a really excellent book that shows you what to do and what not to do, and gives you examples on social media. There's a section on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Tumblr, Instagram. And if you're listening to this way in the future and all of those words sound unfamiliar and those social networks aren't around anymore, forgive me. But the reason why I like this book, and I think you should read it, is Gary has done a ton of research that shows you how to promote your business the right way and through social media. And the reason why that's important to me is because the more connected we get online, the less connected we are offline. Have you ever been sitting on the couch next to your spouse, or maybe it's you, or across the table from a friend at lunch, and you're there in person? You have you could reach out and touch this person, but both of you are on your phones. And the power behind connecting with people is, again, the more internet access, the more access we have to one another, the more disconnected we actually become. And it's not about the social networks. So if you are listening to this way down in the future, or way out there in the future, it doesn't necessarily matter what social network you're on and which one you're talking about. It's about developing a real human connection and telling a story with your video or your images or with your blog posts. It's about telling a story that somebody can relate to and connect with. The last two books that we'll talk about are The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and The Millionaire Messenger. So The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was written by Stephen Covey. And there are two aspects of this book that really hit home, really have a personal impact to me, and I'll share those with you. So the first one is this idea that there are urgent and non-urgent things in our life, as well as there are important and not important things in our life. And I think as we get busier and busier with our careers, with our businesses, we have to become more and more organized and more intentional with how we spend our time. So this is important because he says if we can focus on the important and urgent things in life, we don't have to focus on the things that are not important and not urgent. Let me give you a quick example. A phone ringing is urgent. Just the ringtone says, answer me, answer me, answer me. And it's only available, it's only going to ring for 10 or 15 seconds before it goes away. So it's an urgent thing. But is it important? Most likely not. We've been conditioned to answer the phone because we don't want it to go to voicemail or for whatever reason. But is it more important than what we are working on in that moment? And if we've prioritized, if we've gotten issues out of the way and we've delegated responsibility, like we talked about with Flight of the Buffalo, we can only focus on things that are important and then things that are urgent when they come up. So whatever we're working on is more important than this not urgent or urgent but not important phone call that we're getting. So check that chapter out. I think you'll really like that one. And then there's another one about beginning with the end in mind. And that's a big deal for me because I don't know about you, but I read a lot of books that have questions in them. You know, it's kind of like a home study course within a book. And most of the time, I don't answer these questions. I don't write them out. I think about them in my head, but I don't actually do anything with them. I don't actually sit down, take pen to paper, and write anything out or type something out. But in this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, begin with the end in mind, I did. And he says, Covey says, imagine that you are at your own funeral. Imagine it's 3 years from now and you're at your own funeral. And in the audience, there are people that you worked with, people who you are friends with, and people who are in your family. You're at the back of the room. What do you want someone from each one of those groups to say about you? What do you want your coworkers to say about you? What do you want your friends who know you? What do you want them to say about you? What do you want your family to say about you? About the impact that you had on their life, the changes that you helped them through, or the struggles that you helped them overcome. What is it that you want them to say? Now, if you don't want to go to the funeral aspect of it, think about when you leave a room or when you go home for the weekend or at the end of the day at your work. What do you want those coworkers or those people who are in that room to say about you as soon as you're gone? Do you want to say, man, Ellery never shut up. Ellery was so negative. Ellery was whatever. Or do you want them to say, man, that guy makes me feel good about myself. He always has something positive to say. He always has great advice. Well, when I was answering this question, when I was taking notes at the back of the book to answer this question, what I wanted to be known for was helping people whether they knew it or not. I want to be known for having the best interests in mind of the people around me that are in my life, whether they knew it or not. And I want to have that kind of positive impact in the world. And I hope you will check out that book as well, and you will go through that exercise, because that's one of the key questions that I always ask my mastermind students, my coaching clients. What do you want to be known for? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world? And that's where you have to start if you want to be successful. Begin with the end in mind and work backward and behave accordingly. The next one and the final book that we have here is The Millionaire Messenger by Brendon Burchard. And I love this book because it really helped me clarify how I could take my message and what I wanted to be known for and develop it into a product or something that I could package and sell. Because here's the thing that I've discovered. So let me give you a little bit of context. A few months ago, I started my 30-day blog to business transformation email course. You should absolutely check it out. If you want to go to ellerywells.com/30days, 30days, you can check it out, enroll. I send all the lessons through email. It's pretty awesome. Well, one of the things that I have the students go through when they're going through this course is I ask them, what do you want to be known for? How do you want to be remembered? Exactly like we talked about just 30 seconds ago or so with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And a lot of the responses say, I want to be known as the encourager. I want to be known as the person who lifts people up, motivates them, and helps them get where they go. That was said, it's in that very first lesson, and people say that on a regular basis. More than one person said it. People who don't know each other, who don't live even in the same state, say the same things. They want to be known as an encourager and a motivator and someone who just like I said, has the best people or the best interests of people in mind. And that doesn't make any money and it doesn't have any impact. You can, it's a dime a dozen to get motivational quotes on Facebook, on your Twitter feed. You can go to an app and just download all sorts of motivation, but nobody get paid for motivation. If you've ever heard a motivational speaker come, they didn't get paid to talk about motivation. Here is why the people who make the money doing this or have the impact and influence that we want to have, here's how they get that. And if you have tuned me out because I told you couldn't make anybody any money motivating people, listen up, because here's where it becomes relevant again. Where the money and the impact come are from telling people how to do those things. How do you stay motivated? How do you get things done? How do you lose weight? How do you live healthier? There's no money in, hey, you should be healthy. And look at all these pretty people who are healthy and athletic. There's no money in that. The money and the impact, again, it's not just about money, but the money and the impact come from saying, hey, look at how this person is living healthily. Now let me show you how to do that, how you can take that image and get the results that you want to get. And the Millionaire Messenger is how I figured that out. So again, check out that 30 days blog course. And before you take that answer, think about not only what you want to be known for, but how you can execute it. So anyway, Millionaire Messenger is a fantastic book. It helped me through that process. It helped me go from, I want to help people get started. I want to remove roadblocks that are keeping entrepreneurs get started. And it helped me develop that into financial and technological roadblocks specifically. How do I take what I know and what I'm good at and turn that into a packageable product that I can sell, make money, and move the needle for someone else? That came from the Millionaire Messenger. So if you get one thing out of the time that we've spent together, is that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. The journey of 10,000 hours that you need to become a master begins with the first minute. The journey of 1,000 books begins with reading the first page and maybe even writing that first page too. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you are encouraged to actually do something. Like I mentioned before, when we're talking about motivation, encouragement, and all those other things, this is the step that you need to take. This is the practical experience where the rubber meets the road, the things that you can begin putting in place today to take your success in your career, your life, and your future to the next level. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Empowered Podcast. Before we go, I want to make sure you go to empoweredpodcast.com/79. There are so many links there that I want you to check out. We can get 30 days of access to my membership site for just $1. I do so much with that membership site to help entrepreneurs, aspiring successful people, future successful or current successful people like yourself get started. You can find a link for that at empoweredpodcast.com/79. If you're inspired by the talking about masterminds and coaching and are interested in really investing in your own future, you'll find that at empoweredpodcast.com/79, or you can go to ellerywells.com/coach or /mastermind if you want to go directly there from a mobile device or something like that. And be sure you go over there so you have a chance to win one of those 3 copies of Think and Grow Rich that I mentioned before. Napoleon Hill's book, even though it's 80 or so years old, is still absolutely as relevant today as it was back then, if not more so. And I want to give away 3 copies to listeners of the podcast, readers of the blog, and also those 3 winners will get free access to the membership site for 3 months. And that's going to be a $100 or more value that I want to give away. Again, I don't want there to be any obstacles keeping you from getting started. And I think this is an absolutely fantastic book. In addition to the ones we talked about in this episode today, a fantastic resource for you as well as a membership site to really get you going. And I can't think of a better way to get you started. And one last request. I don't usually ask this, but if you like the show, if you like this episode and you haven't already, subscribe in Stitcher, subscribe in iTunes. And if you haven't, give me a rating and review that helps other people discover the show. And I would greatly appreciate that. You can find, again, links for all of those by going to empoweredpodcast.com/ you guessed it, 79. Again, thanks for tuning in. My name is Ellery Wells. I've been your host today, and we'll see you next week.